In his expert opinion, Cy-Ray repeatedly concludes there's no evidence Bryan Kohberger was at or near King Road during his 23 trips to Moscow. Yet in subsequent interviews, Cy-Ray has said he believes Mr. Kohberger was there. So which is it? Maybe both. Because buried in Cy-Ray's own AT&T analysis are windows of time when Mr. Kohberger could have gone to King Road and left. No advertising data, no location apps, just Cy-Ray's own words and evidence about 23 trips. At least 2 of those 23 trips are very different from the others. Let me be clear from the beginning. This is probably the most speculative video I've made on this case, and perhaps that I will make on this case, and it has to be. We don't have the state's full case. We don't have detailed GPS data for the 23 trips. And we don't have the timing advance records that could potentially narrow down where Mr. Kohberger's phone actually was. So there are questions in this video that I simply can't answer. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise. What we do have is Cy-Ray's expert opinion about the FBI's interpretation of Mr. Kohberger's AT&T records for those 23 trips between Pullman and Moscow. And if you've watched much coverage of his report, you've probably heard one conclusion more than any other from other creators. There is no evidence in the record the device was at or near the crime scene. Cy-Ray reaches some version of that conclusion over and over again. And that's understandably why a lot of creators focus their coverage on that phrase. But remember what we're reading. This is a defense exhibit. It's supposed to present the evidence in the light most favorable to the defense. That's not a criticism, that's advocacy. But whenever I read an exhibit like this, I think it's important to read between the lines and separate the conclusion being argued from the underlying facts being used to support it. Because the following 2 statements are not necessarily the same. Statement 1, there is no evidence in the records that the device was at or near the crime scene. And statement number 2, the evidence shows the device could not have been at or near the crime scene. That distinction between these 2 statements is the entire premise of this video. Sometimes Cy-Ray gives us enough information that for the question we're asking, I think we can effectively rule a particular date out. Other times, something catches my attention, but we simply don't have enough information. And then there are a couple of dates that I think are genuinely interesting. You might too. So I'm putting these dates into 3 groups. Group 1, ruled out. Group 2, unresolved. Group 3, interesting. Before we start sorting dates, let's get oriented. That red pin is 1122 King Road. Moscow's a small city. You can drive across it, either north to south or east to west, in roughly 8 to 10 minutes. But I'm going to be really conservative and call it 15. That gives us a simple benchmark. 30 minutes is enough time to cross Moscow, Idaho, and come back to wherever you were. So when we start seeing gaps substantially longer than 30 minutes, they're worth examining. The other thing that I want you to notice is northeast Moscow. There's no Target, Walmart, or major supermarket up there. It's largely residential. That doesn't mean Mr. Kohberger didn't have a perfectly innocent reason to be there. He could have known someone who lived there. We simply don't know. But there's no obvious shopping destination to explain it either, as some creators have insinuated. And Cy-Ray describes Mr. Kohberger's phone northeast of Moscow on several of these dates. So those dates get my attention. Here's the important test. Where was the phone and how much time passes before Cy-Ray can place it somewhere else? Not whether Cy-Ray says the records don't indicate that Mr. Kohberger went to King Road, whether the records themselves actually rule it out. So let's start eliminating dates. Most of the 23 dates can be dealt with pretty quickly. On 17 of them, Cy-Ray describes movement, handoffs, known destinations, or time periods that simply don't leave enough room for anything particularly interesting for the question we're asking. And I'm not going to spend half this video dragging you through every tower connection and timestamp just to arrive at that same conclusion. You can see the 17 dates on screen. For the purposes of this analysis, I'm ruling them out. That leaves 6. 4 where the geography gets interesting, but the timing is unresolved, and 2 where Cy-Ray actually gives us substantial gaps in the record. Let's start with the 4 we can't answer. I'm going to move through them quickly because they all have the same problem. July 29th into the 30th, Cy-Ray says that the phone was moving and was north and east of Moscow several times. July 31st, again, moving around Moscow, including north and east. August 20th into the 21st. This time, Cy-Ray specifically says Mr. Kohberger spent part of the time northeast of Moscow. And the very next night, August 21st into the 22nd, northeast Moscow again. 4 dates with geography that get my attention. But Cy-Ray is seeing other cell sites and handoffs during these periods, and he doesn't give us the timestamp by timestamp chronology that we would need to know to calculate how much time exists between them. So I can't tell you whether any of these dates contains our 30-minute window, and I'm not going to manufacture one. That makes all 4 of them interesting enough to flag, but remain unresolved. The next 2 dates are different because this time Cy-Ray actually gives us the gaps. Let's start with July 28th. At 9:42 p.m., Cy-Ray says Mr. Kohberger's phone goes off the network approximately 15 miles west of Moscow. That's important geographically because Pullman's only about 9.8 miles west of Moscow. So when the phone goes off the network, it's more than likely west of Pullman. For the next 149 minutes, we have no reported network connection telling us where the phone goes. When it finally comes back onto the network at 12:11 a.m., Cy-Ray places it approximately 4.5 miles west of Moscow. Now, it's definitely east of Pullman, somewhere between Pullman and Moscow. So during those 2.5 hours, the phone goes from west of Pullman to east of Pullman in the direction of Moscow. Where did Mr. Kohberger go in between? I don't know. We don't know. No one knows. But that's a very different picture from a phone that simply disappears somewhere west of Moscow and later reconnects in the same area or reconnects at Mr. Kohberger's house. That doesn't put him at King Road, but it certainly doesn't rule it out either. And that's what makes July 28th interesting. Now November 4th. Mr. Kohberger's already in Moscow. Cy-Ray says he arrives around 8:12 p.m. and places the phone around target until roughly 8:50 p.m. Later at 9:25 p.m., the phone stops reporting connections to the network. Cy-Ray doesn't tell us exactly where the phone was when that 79-minute gap begins. It doesn't report another connection until 10:44 p.m. That's 79 minutes. Cy-Ray also describes the phone in northeast Moscow during the broader sequence of events that evening. But based on the chronology he provides an opinion, I can't tell you that the phone was in northeast Moscow when it stopped reporting, but I don't need to. What matters for our question is that Mr. Kohberger was in Moscow that evening, and Cy-Ray gives us a 79-minute period during which the phone isn't reporting a network connection. Remember our benchmark. We allowed 30 minutes to drive all the way across Moscow and back. This gap is 79 minutes. So there is more than enough time for Mr. Kohberger to have driven to King Road and returned. That does not mean that he did it. It means that amount of time doesn't rule it out. And after describing this period, Cy-Ray concludes there is no evidence in the record the device was at or near the crime scene. And maybe there isn't. But Cy-Ray's analysis also doesn't tell us where Mr. Kohberger was during those 79 minutes. So there's no evidence he went to King Road might be completely accurate. It just isn't the same as evidence that he didn't go there. And that's where I land after going through these 23 trips. 17 I can rule out for the question we're asking. 4 have interesting geography, but Cy-Ray doesn't give enough timing detail to know whether there was an opportunity, and that leaves 2. July 28th, the phone disappears west of Pullman for 149 minutes and comes back on the network east of Pullman, substantially closer to Moscow. On November 4th, Mr. Kohberger is already in Moscow before a 79-minute period where his phone isn't reporting a network connection. Again, does any of that prove Mr. Kohberger went to King Road? No. But after looking at Ray's own analysis of these trips, I'm no longer interested in how many times he says there's no evidence Mr. Kohberger was at King Road. I'm interested in the dates where his own evidence can't tell us where Mr. Kohberger was at all. Because on at least 2 of them, King Road is still on the table. If you like my videos and how I present the information, please subscribe and like the video.